Any area of life that you don't empower, you draw in somebody to overpower you. Welcome to episode 5 of Trigger Proof. Pills don't teach skills. You gotta look inside if you wanna find the answer to your ills. Pills don't teach skills. Covering the truth in exchange for your dollar bills. What is up? My name is Dr. Nima Rahmany, and it is an absolute pleasure for me to welcome you to another edition of Trigger Proof, a show dedicated to helping men and women become 100% responsible for their reactivity, expanding their levels of empathy, love, connection, and intimacy. Expanding that space between stimulus and response. Once again, my name is Dr. Nima Rahmany. I've spent 18 years as a chiropractor helping people primarily with stress-related disorders, frustrated at the fact that the patients that are coming to see me, when we go upstream, we discover that the real cause of their health challenges comes from unresolved emotional wounding, past events and traumas that are not fully whole and complete, and they manifest physically. And in the attempt to work through my own challenges, I discovered through my own recovery tools and strategies that help people heal from the inside out. Today's episode, we are talking about narcissism versus empathy. We're going to talk about it from a healing perspective. We're not going to be talking about from a blaming perspective. This has been one of the most common questions that people call us and message me about regarding toxic relationships. And I received a message in my inbox just recently in the post calling me out for having a narcissistic personality disorder, pretending to do a bunch of healing work, which was not really, evidently not done. I'm shying away from talking about some of the things in my past about becoming physically abusive and narcissistic and all of that. And so it totally confronted me, and it had me asking myself a whole bunch of questions, doing a bunch of research, and looking at my life. And what I discovered after these conversations was something very important that I was really inspired to share with you. I'm going to welcome you to ask questions. I would love for you to participate with me. I'm seeing what you got going on here. If you can let me know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you know somebody who's impacted in a narcissistic, codependent type of relationship, please tag them in this and let them know, because what I have to share with you as far as my own experience and knowledge, and also we have a guest expert here, Dr. Russell Kennedy, who's the anxiety MD and a neuroscientist, who's going to help us talk about these mental illnesses and disorders from the perspective of healing, from the perspective of transformation. Really, the whole goal of this is healing and transformation, is to get you to a place where you are feeling deeply connected with who you are. Basically, the way that we transform people from this state of limbo, should I stay or should I go, in this toxic relationship, feeling disconnected from themselves and disconnected from their purpose, what we do is a process that I call the intimacy upgrade. Now, the intimacy upgrade is a process that I actually had to learn firsthand after going through a devastating breakup, both from a relationship standpoint and a business standpoint. It all happened at once. There was so much toxicity and volatility in the relationship that it got physically abusive. Using these hands that I usually use to heal people were actually used on multiple occasions to hurt my girlfriend. And in the process of the healing of it, we came through on the other side with some very powerful discoveries about ourselves, which I really wanted to share with you in the hopes that our story can actually help you gain more levels of awareness and choice and freedom. So the way that it actually works and transformation happens is what I call the intimacy upgrade. And this is basically the way that it works. You have 3 major grounding steps. And if you look back on the previous episodes 1 to 4, these are all explained in detail, but I'm going to go over them really quickly. The first step to transforming a toxic relationship from limbo, I don't know, should I stay or should I go, to feeling powerfully aligned, deeply intimate, seen and heard, and self-confident, you have to first start by un-effing your nervous system and nervous system regulation. The second part is to dissolve your victim story of the past, usually your primary caregivers. And the third part we talked about last week is learning how to dance with your dark, what I like to call the dark passenger, or shadow, or ego work, or wounded inner child work, all of the same thing. And an interesting thing happens when you put all of those together. When you get this part right, what ends up happening, you regulate your nervous system and dissolve your victim story from the past. You're constantly in the past and worried about the future. When you integrate those, you develop a sense of presence. You feel like you're here and now, rather than past or future, which is where our default mode loves to go. When you dissolve your victim story and you actually see the innocence not only of yourself, but of the people that you once saw as monsters and villains in your life, and you have learned how to dance with that ego, that shadow part, that little voice in that imposter syndrome, inner critic of you that keeps saying, I'm not enough, I'm not enough, I'm not enough, and you learn how to dance with that dark passenger, you develop a sense of understanding. Understanding not only for yourself, but an understanding for the other person. The other person that you were subordinating to, that you were letting them run your life in your mind because of a betrayal or an abandonment story that you're holding on to. And the third part, when you learn to dance with your dark passenger and you actually unscrew your nervous system and you've learned to regulate, that's when you start to develop a sense of authenticity, a sense of fulfillment. You learn how to take off the mask and say, this is who I am, my warts and all, and I'm okay with who I am. And that is probably one of the greatest achievements of a self-actualized human being, is the ability to be able to look in a mirror and say, I love you. Let me know if you have ever tried that and that's been challenging for you, or it's been a great constraint in your life, because by doing all of those things, this is the inner work necessary to heal from a toxic relationship and upgrade your level of intimacy. Today, we're going to go into this other stage, which basically we're going to go into, you actually need in order to intimacy upgrade. You can't do it alone. People say, I'm going to work on myself. You actually need community and a commitment and accountability. We heal in a tribe, we heal in community by being seen and heard. This model of the one-on-one psychotherapy is outdated now. It's now very clear in the research that we do require a social engagement system. To activate our social engagement system, we require community. This is where we practice relationship as a spiritual practice, and you definitely need commitment. And today, we're going to be talking about this fourth element of it, which is empathic communication, empathy. So you might see yourself as an empath, and I'm going to explain a little bit about that. So once we have all of these together, you've now upgraded your intimacy. You now have a deeper sense of self. You have courage. You have vulnerability. You can take off the mask. You can actually be who you really are. And from that space, an authentic relationship can be created. Without getting that part right, relationships tend to be, I remember when I hadn't really gotten this part right, my relationships tended to be transactional. What can that person do for me? What can I do for them? Rather than just a wholehearted sense of fair exchange, which was mutually beneficial, simply for the sake of exchanging love. Because really that's at the very center of it here. I don't know if you can see it. At the very center is love, you know, when you put it all together, because that's really why we're here. Truth be told, really, what is it that you want? I mean, this is why maybe you're on this episode right now and you're watching. What is it that we really want? We want to be seen. We feel seen. We want to feel heard. We want to be loved for who we are. And the reason why we want that is because we want to actually be able to look in a mirror and have this deep sense of inner confidence, a knowing of who we are, why we're here, our value on this planet, and how our contribution, and we want to feel contributed with this fair exchange. And if we don't really get those achievements, those results in our lives through a series of our own inner work and our own personal development, what happens is we start to develop these relationships that are narcissistic codependent. We're going to go into that in just a minute, and I want you to let me know if you can see yourself in my share. What happens is, if you don't get that right, we don't get it, we start to alienate ourselves from other people, whether you're on the narcissistic side or the codependent side, which are basically two ends of the spectrum. The biggest thing that's in your way is trauma. And we're going to go into that. What I wanted to share first off is this concept of narcissism, this exaggerated sense of self, this inflated view, this very polarizing self-interest. Now, when I was called out for that, and when it happened, I had to really look into my life. And at the time, here's the drawback, when somebody, it's a spectrum. When somebody is deep into the trait of narcissism, which really is a response to trauma, which we're going to talk about, their ability to be self-aware and to take that feedback and criticism is zero. You have an exaggerated sense of self-importance. Self-interest becomes priority. One of the hallmarks of that is lacking empathy, an inability to empathize with the other human being in front of you. That person might be your partner. Often are your children. When you expect children must be seen, not heard, if you ever were raised like that, that is narcissistic form of parenting. If you were raised in Persian culture, Indian, any real deeply ethnic cultures, what I've noticed when I'm speaking to some of my clients is the frustration that their parents are constantly projecting their wishes onto the children, which obviously parents are wanting what they perceive to be best for their children. And what happens is when it goes, pendulum swings a little too far, it's kind of like the example of, you didn't have your hockey or soccer dreams realized, you have a child, and then you kind of force them into living your vision and dream, even though that's not really what they want. That's just an extreme version of that. That's a lacking of empathy that you would consider kind of a narcissistic type of parenting. And here are a couple of the hallmarks of it. An inability to handle criticism. Why is that? And a lack of vulnerability. Why is that? When you are really triggered and activated by your narcissistic traits, first of all, I really want you to get this first thing is that everybody has every trait. When you are activated and you are playing up your narcissistic traits, your ability to handle criticism gets shot and your vulnerability is gone, because that is a threat to the ego, because the identification with perfection, with superiority becomes threatened with criticism. And it's too much for the person who is really playing up their narcissistic traits to be able to handle. So criticism, you're unable to experience that. Where does that come from? If you look at Greek mythology, Narcissus was a very good-looking man, and people who would look at him would fall in love, but he was just a bit of a dick. So he would just kind of like toss him aside and kick him to the curb. And one day, Nemesis, who's the Greek goddess of revenge, played a little trick on him and took him into the woods, and he looked into a pond at his own reflection, fell in love with himself, realized that his love can never truly be materialized, and in response to that heartbreak, killed himself. The big kind of realization and revelation that I had about that was narcissism isn't an exaggerated form of self-love. It's actually the opposite. It is a perception of a lack of lovability within themselves. Please understand this. Borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, all of these disorders are actually not disorders. They are traits and they are responses to trauma. We're going to have Dr. Russell Kennedy come on and share with that a little bit. I'd like to invite you, Dr. Russ, to kind of let's talk about that. This whole concept of self-love, that narcissism is really about self-love, is about an exaggerated sense of self-love, but that's not actually what it is at all, is it? It's a perception of a missingness of love. Can you talk a little bit about the trauma aspect of it a little bit, Dr. Russ? Your perception of a disconnection from love, where does the whole narcissism traits come from?
Well, both codependency and narcissism come from typically childhood trauma. So if you don't get your needs met when you're younger, you develop these strategies. You learn how to read a parent. You learn how to do different things. And then part of your ego tells you, hey, this is working. This is getting my needs met, even though it really isn't. And with narcissism, people feel inadequate. So when someone else says, hey, you did really well at this, or you did really well at that, you get this sense of inflation, but it's not a real authentic sense of inflation.
Of an inner knowing. It's not an inner knowing.
No, and then when you get good at that, some people are very good entertainers. So when you get good at that, that's your go-to. So rather than staying in your authentic self, you're drawn farther and farther into this skill, and I put skill in quotation marks, of being a narcissist or being a codependent. It's typically a skill that's learned as a result of trauma.
Yeah, that absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. In my case, this is an interesting case. At the age of 2, when I was separated from my mother for about 2 or 3 months and feeling like I wasn't getting my needs met, I wasn't seen, I wasn't heard, is resource coming back to me? I had this perception of lack, of not feeling seen, and a disconnection from the mother bond. And so what I know to be true is, at 2-year-old, how would they respond? How would a 2-year-old child respond in that situation from that form of separation trauma?
You had a particularly difficult case because it happened when you were 2, and you're pre-verbal at 2. You can't really express it. And even as you're older, it's really difficult to express what that trauma meant to you at age 2. And then on top of that, you have a twin brother. So when the twin brother came back with your mother, first of all, you go into defensive detachment for sure.
100%. Which is kind of like, get away from me.
Yeah, to try and protect yourself.
I don't want to let you in. I don't want to let you into my heart because I'm feeling so betrayed, so abandoned. And by the way, I really want to say a distinction, Dr. Russ. I'm not blaming my mother for this. I've done so much work. We are so bonded now at this point. But this is how I responded, and it actually, what I've observed, it actually was a driving force of how I showed up in relationships. Constantly having this wall up, not really letting anyone in, choosing partners that actually there would be a gross kind of disempowerment scale. Say that again?
A disconnect?
A disconnect in kind of empowerment so that I could make sure that I was never going to be left. And the way that it also shows up is, if I don't have this partner, this is specifically in my 20s and even parts of my 30s, if this person withdraws their love, I better make sure that I have other people in the sidelines waiting because I can't handle the abandonment and the rejection. And that's how it showed up. And this polarizing need to be seen and heard and loved, and look at me, and I have to be superior, and all kind of fed by the cultural norms of parents who had no idea how to see themselves, no idea how to hear themselves, and constantly pushing and putting pressure on the success of their children purely out of love. Felt like a conditional basis of perfection.
Yeah, and you come from Persian culture too, so image is everything. So you got the perfect storm.
How's my hair look, Dr. Russ?
Yeah, your hair looks good. Okay. Actually, let's try this. Nima, your hair looks really bad today.
Okay, you're off. Take care. Thank you. Goodbye. I just got rid of Dr. Russ. He insulted me, and my inability to handle criticism. Just kidding. Get that. I literally cut you off of the show.
Great, though.
Because I'm a narcissist and I have control. I have the button here. So you say one thing to me, brother, and you're.
But it's curious because you have, in the last year almost that I've known, you made a huge movement forward. Like your rhythm is slower. Like when you speak to me, your rhythm is slower. In general, you're slower. I can criticize you. The other day we were on the phone and I said something to you that I thought, if someone said that to me, I would have had a really hard time with. And you just went into yourself. You got slow. Because I think when we get into our authentic self, there is a sense of grounding there. You don't want to play this role anymore because it never really fed your needs. But then the narcissist gets together with the codependent, and they both get fed their poison of choice.
Totally.
And then they link together. So
big thank you to you. Yeah.
It comes from trauma. It's really a trauma reaction.
Absolutely. So here we are. You go through this trauma, and all of a sudden, this inability to be seen and heard creates these traits. It's kind of like, all right, so what does a kid do who isn't feeling seen and heard, what does a child do in order to perceive to get their needs met? Well, they'll put on a mask and be whoever they need to be in that moment to make sure that they're relevant, that they're seen. And the extreme cases you want to look at is, just look up anyone on Instagram and you see Instagram models who are just obsessively looking, at themselves. Or the greatest example would be, somebody like a Donald Trump. The first thing of really transforming this is understanding the psychology of taking them off of this perceived pedestal of, it's like, oh, this person is a monster. And to see the truth of who they really are is that it's a wounded child who has perceived to not get their needs met and is now using all of the tools that they can to do that. Now, this isn't a justification for bad behavior. We're getting an overview perspective so you can understand the dynamic. And the reason why that's important is because of our next point here. And the next point that I really wanted to share in this, I'm going to come back to you, Dr. Russ. We're going to talk about this in just a second. The empowerment and codependency. Now, check this out. That one version of it with all of those narcissistic traits that are adaptive strategies to getting your needs met, and as a result, that individual, now they can be male or female. Traditionally, it's been associated with men, but we've worked with so many people where it's been the exact opposite. Could be your mother, it could be your sister, it could be your wife, could be your partner. It's there, it's prevalent. It's just, we look at that, the male side predominantly quite a bit because there's so much story around it. But check this out. One of the key components to that is that the person who is in that narcissistic side has a polarizing vision for their lives, absolute certainty in their lives. We take the other side of it, the person who's more of the empath or the codependent. You might be more relating to that version. The person who is constantly complaining about their narcissistic partner, whether they be male or female. They're constantly labeling them. They're throwing labels out, not recognizing their part of the dance. How does that work? In my case, in my relationship, you take a situation where my partner had extensive childhood trauma from abuse from mother, abuse from father, abandonment, all of this stuff left, like there was a great deal of trauma growing up and abandonment issues, an abandonment kind of wound. And in my case, there was an abandonment wound, but I respond to it with kind of like an avoidant type of situation, whereas perfect energetic match, the codependent who grew up where everything was an absolute shit show, and in order to feel like they get their needs met, they have to polarizingly become very attuned to the needs of mom or very attuned to the needs of dad. These are the people that will call themselves empaths. I mean, you can relate to that, right, Dr. Russ? You can relate to that, right? It's this concept of you were on the other end of the spectrum where mom and dad were an absolute shit show because they were going through their own traumas of their own. They couldn't see themselves. They couldn't feel themselves. They were dissociated from themselves. And in order for you to actually feel safe at home, you literally have to abandon all of your own needs and take care of other people. So you become highly attuned to being the rescuer, to looking out for other people. Can you talk a little bit about how that kind of plays out in the neurology and in the dance of the narcissistic codependent connection?
Yeah, because you get your needs met in a certain way of being, at 12 or 13, I was told how smart I was, how good I was at reading other people, how good I was at helping and taking care of other people. So that inflated my ego a little bit. And I thought, hey, this is the way to do it. Then I got pulled farther.
Become a doctor.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I became a doctor. Exactly.
Me too.
Yeah, and then I got pulled farther and farther along that because it does feed your ego for sure. So you start thinking, well, hey, it felt horrible before, and this feels better, so maybe I'll just keep doing this. So that's how codependents get born. Narcissists get born in the same way. They just react in a different way. They get their need. They find a different way of meeting their needs, and then they find that it works. And you're a great entertainer, so that pulls you into that thing, and then you get lots of accolades for that. So it pulls you in. We get drawn into our false self so quickly.
Here's what was happening exactly. here I am becoming this entertainer, becoming this healer, and getting all of this praise and recognition, and literally it was feeding the ego, the false self that I was concocting in order to get my needs met. And here was the worst part of it. I was becoming very successful at it. And it was extremely unconscious. And any feedback that I was getting, hey Nima, you know what, you're really into yourself. I was just like, whatever, I can't handle the criticism. This is whatever, this is all a projection. I would turn it around. This is all you, which is a classic kind of deflection of what you do. This is usually what they call gaslighting or anything like that. It's just, all it is a protection of ego. We can label these people as monsters, or we can go, they're protecting their ego, not as a justification for behavior. It's just to take this imposed pedestalization and disempowerment of self, bring balance to it so you can see the innocence, see through it, and then have choice in the matter. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And the thing about you is you were always in alarm. And when you're in alarm, you can't be your authentic self. So when you're in alarm, you'll go to those old go-to patterns. For me, it was codependence. For you, it was kind of narcissistic kind of traits. It took you out of that particular, it took me out of that pain of just being in limbo. So it's like, it's better to do this something rather and get some positive energy from it rather than just sit there in pain. But it takes you farther and farther away from your authentic self. And then you learn how to be that way. And then codependents and narcissists attract each other because they feed each other the poison that they love.
Exactly. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to come right back to you, buddy. Here's the rub. This is the interesting part. As soon as the breakdown happened, women would start to call me who were involved in relationships with men who were quite, very similar to, there were leaders. You want to look at, as far as the narcissistic traits go, the people who are leaders, actors, you have to sort of have a little bit of narcissism in order to get up and overcome the inertia of the imposter syndrome that feels that you're not worthy. So these are not disorders, they're a spectrum, and sometimes we got to be able to pull the most highly evolved part of you will be able to pull your narcissistic side and your empathetic side and use these personality traits to the advantage of others and yourself through life. This is actually something that you can access through consciousness, but most of the time it's unconscious. And the biggest aha that we would get from our clients when they would come in who were stuck in that narcissistic codependent cycle is this realization right here. And you're gonna wanna write this down. Any area of life that you don't empower, you will draw in somebody to overpower you. Let me repeat that. Any area of life that you don't empower, you draw in somebody to overpower you. In other words, there are no victims. So there's 7 areas of life: spiritual, mental, career, financial, social, family, and physical, health, beauty, and vitality. If you disempower any of these areas of life, the person that you connect with will automatically, energetically overpower you. So the bully and the bullied are a perfect energetic match for one another. And your empowerment comes from the realization that the reason why you are drawn to that polarizingly, self-aggrandizing, confident vision is likely because you don't have a vision of your own. You don't have a voice of your own. And that's not your fault. It's just that you haven't yet learned that that's available to you. That's why if you are completely confused with who you are, completely dissociated, you are traumatized from your past, your nervous system is dysregulated, you're living a victim story from your past, like a father who had those similar traits, and you haven't learned how to dance with your ego and dark passenger and really own your power, and you haven't learned empathic communication. Being empathic to get your needs met isn't necessarily is a conscious empathy. It's a unconscious empathy, which is selfish in its origin. It's basically, I'm going to empathize with you so that I can make sure that I'm safe. I'm going to take care of all of your needs so that I can get my survival needs met. That is exactly what happened in my last relationship. We had a person who was confused about their sexuality, their job, who they are. They were completely stuck in a past victim story, not really understanding how to dance with the ego, not really having done the deep inner work, myself included. Just on a surface cognitive level I had done it. I had not really understood the depths of embodiment work and attunement and nervous system regulation. So both of us came in, the narcissistic codependent was a perfect volatile dance with one another. Now, add in incredible sexual shame, past sexual trauma, high addiction towards sexuality, both of us, and now you have the recipe for a beautifully volatile, codependent, just absolute toxic relationship, which is just as intoxicating as it is toxic. Now, let me know if you can actually resonate with this. I guarantee you, if you look back and you will see that there is always a disempowerment tied in to that codependency. If you don't really learn how to get this right, what happens? What's the challenge? The biggest obstacle in the way of the clients that come to us is people holding on to their victim story about it, not really seeing in that moment, especially during the volatility, that you who are being, in that abusive dynamic, were actually, you had power when you didn't think that you did. There's an actual activation that you bring out of each other fueled by toxic shame. For me, I didn't want people to know certain things. We both had these secrets, and there was this, both of us completely manipulating one another, and it was completely unconscious. Others could see it, but it was like, okay, well, here it is. And the gift of the breakdown was this wake-up call for me to really look and take full ownership of where I disempowered myself and I gave up the control, and for her to do exactly the same. So that's the only way of actually healing that. And so what I wanted to do is ask Russ, how often can you see this dynamic and this volatility coming up with this codependent and this narcissistic perfect match for one another? What does it actually take to heal this, Dr. Russ? What does it take to actually transform that?
Well, first, awareness that you are a codependent or you are a narcissist. That's the first thing. And then embracing that, and then embracing that about yourself. Because the more you reject a part of you, the more you get locked in it. If you reject your narcissism, you'll get locked in it. And that's where you've done such a great job over the last 9 months, is fully loving that part of you that needed to be a narcissist. And if you're a codependent, love that part of you. Understand that that's how you got your needs met as a child. And you got to remember that we equate familiarity in childhood with security. So whatever was familiar for you, so if you were abused as a child, you will replicate that in your relationship. If you were somehow treated in a certain way by your parents, you will find someone that treats you in exactly the same way. And that's what Nima was talking about when he started saying, if you disempower yourself at one area of your life, someone will come in and take that over. So it's a matter of learning how to connect to yourself. First of all, seeing that trait, and then loving that part of you, seeing your innocence, seeing that it came from trauma. It's not who you are. It's not your authentic self. It came from trauma. It's a coping strategy that you developed that happened to be really, really, it fed you.
Useful.
It was useful. Absolutely. Yeah. So, and the more useful it is, the more we're likely to follow that path. We equate familiarity with security. So we will, and that's why I see some of these couples that get together and have this amazing, intense connection when they first get together. And I'm often a little wary of those relationships because often they're really just replicating their old childhood wounds in a perfect storm, finding the person who treated them just as their parent did. 100%. So to heal that, to answer your first question, try it quickly as I can, to heal that, first accept it in you, and then love it in you, and then see where it moves from there. Because just seeing that you did it, because it's not, don't judge yourself for it, because if you judge it, you'll lock yourself in it. Completely accept it. It's like Brene Brown talks about shame. You cannot shame yourself into changing. You have to love yourself into changing. So that's 100%. The best I can do with that.
So here's the key. One of the things that Brene Brown, speaking of Brene Brown, said, and I really want you to write this down, and I want you to see how this resonates with you. This is very important for me, for you to get this information, because the people who are complaining about their toxic relationship, their narcissistic partner, wife or husband, the first step to really healing is to dissolve your victim story. And what she says is really very powerful. She talks about blame. She says, blame is a way to discharge pain and discomfort. Blame is a way to discharge pain and discomfort. The pain and discomfort of owning why I put myself in this situation in the first place. Now, your ego will not want to take ownership, will want to separate instead of joining, will want to see separation and see that person's a narcissist and I'm so amazingly empathetic. Your first step to transforming this, okay, number one, is to take full ownership of how you got there. Take full ownership of the traumas that had you act in ways and choose partners that were similar, as Freud says, a repetition compulsion of your incompletes with mom and dad. It's weird. The universe is trying to get you to complete those things. That's why in the intimacy upgrade, we guide people, whatever's going on in your relationship that you're just so fed up and you're up to here, you're like, fix that person, which is what everybody says, fix my narcissistic husband, fix my narcissistic wife, this and this. Like, the first step is to stop pointing the finger, take away the microscope and grab the mirror and take full ownership and take them off of that pedestal of monster that you put in and really see through that. See that wounded child that is actually acting out that you have the power to activate, usually through rejection. One of the ways that the dynamic that would really cause this stir, especially from that narcissist who gets activated and gets really angry and completely volatile and reactive and triggered, is the trigger of the perception of rejection. So when they perceive rejection, that will cause an activation. Now, to me, that is quite an empowering realization that you, at one point, thought you were completely powerless to this monster, have the actual power to create that kind of a reaction in that other person, which then all of a sudden empowers you to not be so much the victim and to see through the ego and see the wounded child in that other person, see the innocence in that other person, because without empathy, you will not heal. A very interesting story is, you know, as I was frustrated last year, I really wanted to heal this. And after the breakdown happened, I moved back in with my parents so that I can actually put this to the test. And so the story that I have kept telling myself was that my parents had zero empathy. They had zero empathy because I was going through a difficult time and they were constantly trying to fix it, and all I wanted was them to just get me. And I just felt this blockage. And so I sat down and I did my overview process on it. And I discovered when I asked myself the question, because this was how I healed it, I was so frustrated with their lack of empathy, I had to ask myself this question: who sees me as lacking empathy? So I want you to really understand this. If you're an empath and you're with somebody who you perceive to be as a narcissist, I guarantee you, because I've tested this on many of our clients, that the one person that you lack empathy for is that monster that you're perceiving that you've put on a pedestal and given them superhuman traits. Because the second, now you might argue and say, well, they don't deserve my empathy, they're assholes and they've abused me and this and this and this, which you got to understand, this is their childlike version. This is not who they really are, but you've now categorized them as something like that. And so in order to heal that, you must take the blame and put that aside and stop discharging your pain and discomfort there and start looking within and change that story and take them off the pedestal. And the next part here is to empathize with them. So I sat down and I remember this argument that I had with my dad. And I was just like, you guys are narcissistic parents. You don't understand me. I was my little teenager at the time. And my father comes in and he goes, narcissistic empathy? He comes in and goes, well, this is what he said. And it's kind of funny, and I kind of laugh about it now, and I love my parents, and this is really neat. It's a Persian thing as well, too. And he turns and he says, empathy? What about you empathizing with us? What about you empathizing with us? And I sat down, and my first thought was, well, that's pretty much exactly what a narcissistic parent would say. And then my second thought was, holy shit, I really haven't done that, because I've been too busy putting them on this monster, this pedestal, this they should understand me and they're narcissists, and I had labeled them. I was blinded by the label. When you label somebody, all you're going to do is look for evidence of that label coming true. kind of like when I'm being labeled as that, and there is nothing that I would be able to do to overcome that label, because you can always find evidence to support whatever story that you want to tell. This is just how our brains work, our reticular activating system works. The second that I stopped and I was like, holy crap, Mom and Dad, it must be very difficult for you to love somebody, your child, so much and give them all the advice and him not take it. Like, don't be dating this person. We don't support you with that. And I just say, screw off, I'm gonna do that. And it ends up blowing up in my face. And then all of a sudden they turn out to be right in their opinion, and I'm struggling and they have to watch that. And for a moment I stopped and I actually felt what it would feel like to be them. And my heart opened and I shared that with them, and it was an interesting thing that happened. That was the healer. That completely changed a step in the dance, and their narcissism was literally almost evaporated. In fact, a couple of weeks later, my mom comes to me and says, Nima, we have decided to take a course on empathy. And I'm like, what? She was taking the course and she's like, my goodness, empathy is really hard. And I just started laughing. I'm like, exactly. And it was really cute because my mom was kind of looking over her notes. She says, when you are in empathy, you have to say, it must feel like. And I'm like, holy crap, Mom. I have never heard those words from you before. And I realized that I had never heard those words from my mom. It must feel like, boom, which I really want you to write that down. In order for you to empathize with the person that you're with, you start a sentence off with, it must feel like blank, that person feels like you're joining them. And in so doing, that narcissistic trait about them starts to dissolve, because finally they feel seen and heard, because the reason why they're displaying those narcissistic traits and defending themselves and not being able to handle criticism is because they can't see or feel themselves because of a past trauma. And who hasn't gone through it? My parents went through war. My dad went through a death of his mother, which he literally had to shut down his grief in order to kind of keep moving as a 14-year-old. So there's a dissociation from self and dissociation from empathy from self. So how are they able to empathize with me? And so when I got that, all of a sudden, the relationship completely transformed. The moral of the story is empathy is the healer. The problem that's in the way is you're too busy labeling that other person to even see that they're actually a wounded child. You've put them up on a pedestal and completely destroyed all chances of seeing them as equals, because you've put them up on a pedestal and you have not owned your disempowerment in all areas of life that had caused you to be drawn so heavily to that type of a characteristic, so that you can wake up. Here's the gift of it. The abuse, the trauma, the whatever happens is designed to break that chemical addiction, codependency that you have with one another, so that you can go off and empower all areas of life. It's kind of like a chemical bond. I'm not justifying violence at all. I'm just when I'm looking back at what happened in my relationship, I had to find out, how did I get there? How can I make sure it doesn't happen again? And how can I make sure that other people, if I can figure this out in my life, I want to make sure other people don't go through the exact same thing. That's what we're here for. We're a stand for families so that they don't repeat the cycles of trauma. And it happens through this process. It happens through breaking your disempowerment, owning your life, connecting with yourself, and finding your own inner power, where at one time you gave it away to somebody else because you've labeled them. So in order to really bring this point home, I really want to introduce you to somebody very special to me, who came reached out to me dealing with anxiety and panic attacks because of a past relationship with abuse, with volatility, with aggression, with all of that. And there was so much that there was actually a restraining order, and there was no desire to connect, and it was completely labels. And the impact of that was that her and her 5 kids were there was a disconnection there, and there was anxiety, and there was a lack of fulfillment and lack of health. And she went through this entire process and was able to transform that. And I want to introduce you to her. Her name is Shamila. Shamila, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Can you hear me? Hello. It's great to see you. I'm so grateful that you joined us and you're able to make it. Were you able to kind of listen in on what we were talking about?
For half an hour, I'm here. So
okay, great. So I'd love for you to share with me this whole process of how you transformed. Where were you before? What was the impact of your victim story, and how did you kind of get through it, and what's been the result now in your family?
Thank you for actually letting me share.
Big love to you here. You're like my sister. You got to understand my relationship with my clients, especially when we see them through some difficult times, becomes like a brother sister. So I'm so grateful that you're here, Shamila.
I had 2 restraining orders against my ex-husband. There was so much pain. Like, children were in pain. They were walking on eggshells. They were confused. I was in so much pain that I was feeling like everything has been taken away from me. I have to take care of my children. My life is done. There is nobody to take care of me. And I have been robbed and betrayed and all that. And there was physical and emotional trauma to it. And I had all the reasons that I can believe it, that I was not safe in the world, and I have to keep on striving hard to actually make it and take care of my children. And I felt supremely alone in that. Cause of that was there was always a story going on in my head against him, anything that was happening. And even if I was tired, it was because of him, because he's not taking care of his children, even, and how he has beaten me up. So my body is giving up. It was a constant hell where I was living, and I had no idea actually I was living there because I was living in it.
Inside your head.
Yes.
The stories in your head. Something happened years ago, and for how many years were you going through those victim stories in your head? Now, I'm not saying we're not justifying violence. It's just when it happens, we can carry it with us for years. How many years were you carrying it with you before we met?
It's almost 9th year now. So when I met you, it was in 2017. So it was almost like 6.5 years or 7 years ago. 7 years of I thought that I have been processing it, going to therapy, doing all those things, empowering myself. But still there was a small portion of the story switch that I had to make, to look into a different perspective that was missing, and that was causing me paralyzing anxiety.
You couldn't leave the house. You couldn't even go to you couldn't even go to Costco, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I was not attending parent-teacher meetings. I was just doing my job because that I needed to do that just to pay the bills. When after taking the course, definitely it has in 3 months period and afterwards too, being part of the whole group and being in the community, it has given me more and more knowledge of that. Afterwards, one thing, of course, my anxiety is gone. I was physically and emotionally more capable of to engage and participate in life. So I was looking at things that made me happier and gave me joy and fun. I was there with my children to look into them, into their life, participate in their life, being a mother.
Because before you were so stuck in your story, there was no empathizing with them. You were too busy rambling on, going through the stories in your mind and your victimhood and how you were wronged. You weren't able to see any innocence in anyone else. So you disconnected from your kids.
So to give an analogy, right now I'm sitting in my car because I'm at work too, so I'm taking a little break. So if you're driving, looking at your back view mirror, so just imagine that. That's how I was.
That's how most people live.
Looking at back view mirror, you will be so scared of being in an accident because you're not even looking forward. You're only looking backwards. And that's what I was living. So that's why I was so paralyzed. You cannot drive. You cannot move forward when you're looking only at the back view mirror.
Totally.
So that's how I was at there, but I didn't know that this is how I was looking at. I was thinking that I'm doing right. When I got the perspective, the new perspective, I took the restraining orders off, and I said, "This man actually no power over me."
That's the key, right there, Shamila. This is so powerful. Because there are women out there, a lot of women, we're talking, there's a pandemic of women who are telling the story that I am powerless. And what did you discover through this process and through his behavior and your contribution to the entire dance? Not fault. By the way, please understand, this is not victim blaming. Most people are going to say, oh, Nima, you're victim blaming. Are we victim blaming you here, Shamila? Can you explain that a little bit?
I also struggled in the very beginning. Am I putting the whole focus of becoming somebody who is like criticizing myself that it is my fault? It's not that it was my fault. There was a role that I played. So the role that I played was that one thing, allowing it, letting it come to me, giving my power away, not actually speaking up, not only taking actions towards it, not actually saying no when
setting boundaries, respecting boundaries, setting boundaries. Nobody taught you those things.
No. So I was just like floating in there, and wherever he was taking me, I was just going there. And then when he took me to the edge then I started screaming and blaming him. It is not that I had the same things I could have done. I'd have not taken my own 100% responsibility or my own ownership of myself.
Beautiful. This is not, please understand, before the hate mail comes in, and that's okay if this is triggering you, this is a show called Trigger Proof. So expect to be triggered, especially when you listen to Shamila's share. This is not about victim blaming. This, as she just said, it's about taking full ownership of how you got there, your unconsciousness that got you there. It's two unconscious people. It's not just one. It's two unconscious people that got together and had an event or several to awaken them to find their own power and possibility. So what happened on the other side after you cleared that? Can you share a little bit when you made these discoveries and you took full ownership? You lifted those restraining orders. So tell me more about that. What happened?
I would like to add a little bit. I just recently read Yuval Harari's book. I really got that, how he talked about how we human race, as a human race, as human beings, we cannot change our DNA, but we can change our stories, and it happens very fast and changes the whole direction of the human civilization, and it happens with the life too, the human life too. So when I changed my story, and my new story was that I am powerful and I had my role in it. I still have my role in it, and I have the choice to direct it. Actually, he doesn't have the role to direct it anymore. It's me. And I want to direct it from a point of view where I want to see him being a very responsible and caring and loving father present for my children. And the minute my story changed, he actually started showing present and responsible and loving father for my children, where he was refusing to see them. Now he's seeing them, he's paying for them, he's supporting them. I don't have to communicate in regard for their behalf. They connect with him and they talk to him, and they have their father in their life because I changed my story. And I am so amazed by this. When my guards fell down, I don't know how. He started showing up as he wanted to be, as I wanted him to be. So not only him, my son who was estranged, he started talking to me. Such a loving relationship. I had no idea. I didn't go out and had a megaphone saying that, oh, I'm thinking differently. I didn't tell anybody.
You went inside and you healed those core wounds and you took him off the pedestal. Instead of seeing him and labeling him as a monster, you started to, empathy. Here's why. This is the whole point. This discussion is not about the blame game. It's not about victim blaming. It's about getting out of the blame game. Instead of discharging pain and discomfort, going in and feeling that, so that empathy can be the healer. I used empathy to heal my relationship with my parents when I was begging for them to see and hear me until I stopped, and then I saw and heard them completely change to step in the dance. And I really wanted you to share your story about how that transformed the relationship, because you took the time to go inside and work on you, and a rising tide lifts all boats. So the entire family has transformed simply because of the work that you've done. I just want to acknowledge you, Shamila, for your courage, your bravery, your vulnerability. 2 years ago, guys, can you guys give Shamila some love here? This is pretty amazing. Can you guys give her some love? How much courage and vulnerability it takes to be a stand for her children. 5 kids, by the way. 5 children, to then transform that relationship with herself first, to find her power, to transform and empathize with somebody she once saw as a monster, who was very mean and nasty to her, and then own her role in the dance. Because he has a role too, of course. That other person has their role too. This is two people, right? But to own that part of it and transform you and then literally see a shift in the dynamic, I want to acknowledge you. This is what the work is about. This is what we stand for. And we stand for the transformation of families, and you are basically a walking billboard for it. I want to say thank you, and I love you, sister.
Thank you so much. Love you too.
Is there anything that you would love to say to anybody who's stuck in that dynamic? What do you have as a kind of like a final message for them? Because we're just about to sign off, right?
So far, there are moments of me thinking of him as was that he will kill me because I have wounded him so much. So he will come and kill me anytime in a moment. I have seen him as 5 years old boy who is so desperate that he wanted the approval from me in certain ways.
He felt rejected by you.
It was all his thing. I have nothing to do with it. When I only see that and I say, I'm not giving this to him, but I'm not afraid of him. It's his thing. It's his issue. And I have my own responsibility of like making me fulfilled, making my life better, and just focusing on what I require him to act as for my children, nothing to do with me. And as I come from that place, he actually doesn't approach me. He doesn't try to mess with my life. He is going for his children only, being a father. And I am allowing it to him, and going so awesome so far. But it's a constant work.
It's constant work, and the work is never done, and we're constantly called on to upgrade ourselves. And I want to say thank you for participating and showing us what's possible. You've really inspired me today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time from work. You can head back to work now. Bye-bye. That was inspiring. It's really neat when we see those stories and we see what, what happens to people when they actually take part in all of this. So I wanted to sum it all up. Number one, in order to heal that dance between the narcissistic codependent and to heal that, wherever you're at, please, if you know somebody that really needs to listen to this, it can be healed depending on the spectrum. The spectrum of it, and the person has to be willing. That's not always easy, but when somebody's not willing to look, we're forced to kind of look within ourselves, and it allows us in a situation we cannot change. As Shamila gave as an example, we are called on to change ourselves. Number one step is a recap. Take full ownership of how you got there. Number two, take that other person off of this self-imposed pedestal and see the truth of who they are. Your role in activating them and your role in your unconsciousness in how perfect the dynamic was at the time you got together. Until now you got tired of not knowing who you are. Number three is to empathize first and foremost with yourself, and then empathize and upgrade your intimacy with yourself, and then upgrade your empathy to include that other person and see and hear them for the truth of who they are by dropping the blame and dissolving that victim story for a moment so that you can see that. And I know that this is not a justification for bad behavior. If you're in, some people, it's gone too far, and there's addictions and there's heavy duty unconsciousness. So you need a break to then go through all of these stages of healing your nervous system, dissolving your victim story, learning how to dance with that shadow of yours, learning empathic communication, and having a community of people around you to actually hold you accountable to your greater version. That's the gift of it. The last point that I wanted to share is empathy is the healer. I'm grateful to be able to empathize first with myself so that I can see that who I am is not these masks that I wear, that I pretend to be. Who I am is far deeper. And as I continue to evolve that relationship with myself and feel more certitude and certainty of the truth of who I am and why I'm here, I become more empathetic with other people. I'm able to see the innocence of not only myself, but other people. My heart opens, we become more empathetic. I'm able to see and hear and love myself. And that way I can then make a contribution to others. And you're exactly the same way. I'd love to hear from you. Please join us next week live, noon p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And that's, I believe, 6 a.m. Sydney on Thursday mornings in Australia. Wherever you're at in the world, I hope you got value from this. Let me know what came up for you. Let me know if you'd like for us to take a look at your individual case. Send us a private message. Please, please, please remember, it is up to you to change internally. If you want to see the outside world transform, your outside world is a direct reflection of what's happening internally. The most congruent, the most powerful thing that you can do is to go inside, and to also make sure you have a community and a mentor that will hold you accountable, who's been through what you've been through, who won't shame you, who won't make you wrong, but to really help you hold a mirror to yourself and find the power that you had felt that you had given away for so long. Looking forward to seeing you at the next perfect time. Please let me know if you have any other questions, and we'll see you next week to talk about mentorship, community, and the power of the social engagement system. See you next time on Trigger Proof.